You are going to be given some form of an architectural project or design brief for all of your design projects. You might even receive a brief for any other project that includes a level of design in your construction, communication, possibly even history and theory classes. But what is a project brief? Why is it so important, and what exactly should you do with it? Hi, I'm Liz Watt. Welcome back to Archimash, the best place for aspiring architects to learn faster and easier. So an architectural brief is a document prepared for a design project, and it's either developed by a person or a team in consultation with the client or the person who's creating the project. An architectural brief has two parts. The first is the project brief or scope of services. So this is the requirements to deliver the project, including the process and activities required by the entire project team to deliver the final physical outcome. The second part is the design brief or scope of works. This is the parameters of the physical project and final outcome of a design or building project. The design brief normally sits within the overall project brief. So a project or design brief can be as simple as a one-page document to a document hundreds of pages long, depending on the complexity of the project. A project or design brief can be created in two ways. It can be pre-prepared, where the design brief is completed by the client or another consultant to define the detailed needs of the project. This is then given to an architect or designer as part of a tender process to respond to with a fee proposal for completing the project. Or you can create a back brief, where the client provides a small amount of information to the architect or designer, who will then develop the brief in much greater detail. They're usually paid for this work until the overall project and design brief is agreed, and the designer's scope of services can then be determined. Now, at university, you may be given a very detailed architecture brief, or even asked to develop parts of it in more detail yourself. Let's look at each of the project and design briefs in more detail. So the project brief includes the extent of work and activities expected to be completed by the designers and consultants as the process required to complete the project. This will be different in practice compared to university, but it's good to see a parallel between the two. Your university projects are acting as little mini projects and do reflect reality to an extent. So this will include information about the client or sponsor, or who will pay for the project and make final decisions. It includes the schedule, which is the overall time allowed and major stages or phases for completing the project, and the work or services. In practice, this will usually be determined by the client or negotiated with the lead architect or designer. The size and complexity of the project will determine the time required for design, documentation, and then construction. Now, at university, this will usually be a fixed amount of time within the semester. It's important to note the overall time allocated for each project when you receive it. Project brief will include milestones. These are key targets or goals that occur during the project process. Milestones create something to aim for at regular intervals and keep the project on track so that it doesn't go over time. In practice, this will include key deadlines such as town planning submission, tender processes, engagement of a contractor, construction, and then completion of the project. This could also include regularly scheduled meetings with clients, consultants, or contractors at various stages of the project. At university, this is more likely to be weekly submissions and interim presentations for feedback and reviews, and final presentation. At university, it's a good idea to treat your tutor or teacher as a client. Consider what their expectations are in terms of you as a professional designer or architect completing work each week for them to review. How would a client react if you did no work between their meetings? The project brief also includes project costs. This includes the amount of money available for the overall project, including the construction cost, as well as consultant and design fees, and other costs such as reports, town planning fees, or utilities like water or gas or electricity, and the fees associated with those. In practice, the overall project cost will be determined by the client or project manager. The design and consultant fees will usually be a percentage of this. The final consultant fees will be based on the size of the project and the estimated hours required to complete the work. At university, you'll most likely not have a project budget. You also won't be paid for your work, unfortunately, but you will usually be given an indication of the expected hours required to complete the project and the subject. This is similar to how you'd manage a real-life project. It's a good idea to break this up over the number of weeks for completion, so you know how many hours and the extent of work is expected to be completed each week. And unfortunately, be prepared that the work may take longer than suggested, especially when you're learning. Project brief also includes deliverables. These are the packages you'll prepare to complete and deliver, including the number of drawings, models, and other specific documents and records of your work, process, and progress. In practice, this may include all the document packages for concept and presentations, town planning, tender or construction, as well as meeting minutes or interim reports. At university, deliverables will include the final submission or folio, and maybe a series of interim submissions and assessments, as well as weekly work to be presented for feedback and review, and all your analysis and process work. That's the project brief and the scope of services. The design brief and the scope of works often sits within that, and it's the parameters of the physical project and final building outcome. So this includes looking at location, site, and existing conditions, where the project will be located, the physical site, boundaries, and any existing information about the conditions and structures on the site. It looks at typology, the type of building or structure that is to be designed and constructed, such as a school, a house, hospital, shop, or office building. There may be agreed precedents or examples of similar buildings or aesthetics or best practices for this type of building that can be used as a reference. The design brief also refers to users, so it considers who will be using the final project or the outcome of this. It looks at the scope of the building or structure. This is a description of the difference between the existing conditions and the final building that's going to be on the site. It includes the estimated overall size of the final structure and any associated works in a high-level summary. It'll define if the project is a new build, a refurbishment, or renovation, or if there's any demolition work on the site that needs to occur before construction. It will describe the estimated overall area, the number of above ground and basement levels, and give a high-level summary of the project. It includes an architectural program, which is a detailed breakdown of the spaces within the project based on client requirements, user activities and needs, and functional spaces required for the building to operate. It considers materials and finishes, so there may be particular materials or technologies that need to be considered for the building type or the location. There could be some council or government regulations around that in terms of what you can and cannot do. It looks at givens, assumptions, opportunities, and constraints. A design brief should try to identify everything that is known about the project as well as the unknown and things that need to be considered and questioned further. It looks at aspirations, goals, and visions. So these are the more intangible desires for the project. This includes what the client or end users will want to experience and obtain from the project. Now, to learn a little bit more about some of these elements of the design brief, review the episode titled Top 9 Architecture Design Factors for All Architecture Projects. I'll leave the link in the description. Once you have a project brief and a design brief, you want to know how to read it. So your project or design brief is the best guide for developing your project. At university, the rubric or assessment criteria and the brief will together tell you what you're being assessed on and how much emphasis is given to different aspects of the project process, design, development, presentation, and skill. The brief and rubric are not documents to just be skimmed over and never looked at again. These are instead documents to be printed out, analyzed, read, reread, highlighted, marked up, and referred to regularly. In both practice and at university, it is your job as a designer to make sure every part of the project brief and design brief is addressed and the requirements are adequately met. The best way to use a brief is to print it out. Alternatively, you can use a digital copy, but a hard copy is so much better to mark up and have with you at all times and take notes and clarify things as you go along. Take a highlighter or a red pen and start to work through the document, highlighting each thing that is expected or required to be completed. You could use one color for the scope of works or the design requirements, and another color for the scope of services or the actual work and process that's expected of you. In particular, you're looking for numbers, quantities, dimensions, and amounts, as well as particular phrases that describe a specific outcome or physical requirement. Identify the unknown, ask questions, and refer to that document regularly to make sure your design is adhering to the requirements. Your architecture project and design brief become a benchmark for measuring the success of your project, so learn how to use it well. If you've got any questions or thoughts about project briefs or design briefs, please let me know in the comments or at archimash.com/ Ask Liz. If you want to know more, make sure you consider subscribing to my channel because I have a ton of content to share to help make learning, studying, and practicing architecture easier and faster. While you wait for the next episode, make sure you check out some of my work here or at archimash.com. That's it for today. I hope this was helpful and gave a bit more clarity around the difference between the project brief and the design brief. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.